The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. The disciples approached Jesus and said, "Why do you speak to the crowd in parables?" He said to them in reply, "Because knowledge of the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven has been granted to you, but to them it has not been granted. To anyone who has, more will be given, and he will grow rich. From anyone who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables, because they look but do not see, and hear but do not listen or understand. Isaiah's prophecy is fulfilled in them, which says, 'You shall indeed hear but not understand. You shall indeed look but never see. Gross is the heart of this people. They will hardly hear with their ears. They have closed their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and be converted, and I heal them. But blessed are your eyes, because they see, and your ears, because they hear. Amen, amen, I say to you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." The Gospel of the Lord. This morning in the prophet Jeremiah should remind you a little bit about the prophet Hosea. Remember, we talked about in Hosea, he compared Israel to an unfaithful wife or to a prostitute or a harlot. And this is a theme that actually appears in many of the prophets. They're constantly accusing Israel of infidelity. Right? This is one of the most obvious things that for some reason people still miss, right, in the book of Revelation. Right? When it talks about the great harlot, who else would that be but Israel, but Jerusalem, right? All throughout the Old Testament, Jerusalem being unfaithful is compared to a harlot or an unfaithful wife, right, who has given herself over to the Baals. We all know that the Baals, right, that was the Hebrew word for basically the generic word for the false gods that the people of that day worshipped. Right? So Baal in particular was a particular deity, but also just as a general term, right? They called the false idols the Baals. And we talked about, when we were talking about the prophet Hosea, that there's actually literally kind of a marriage imagery to that. That the word for Baal was not just the word for this false god, but it was also the word in Hebrew that concubines would use for their husbands, right? But not the relationship of equality. Rather, it was if you were a concubine. So Baal was like your master. So what the prophets kept telling the people of Israel is that when they gave themselves over to other religions, right, when they turned away from the covenant with God, right, it was like they were being unfaithful. But not only that, but they were literally giving themselves over in a quasi-marriage relationship, right, with those different deities. And it was a very bad thing to do. And we've talked about this before, that one of the reasons why it was so bad that they worshipped these false gods is because we know from the scriptures, right, and this is really all throughout church history, people talked about this, but in our modern age, a lot of people don't realize it, is that the reason why those people committed those acts of idolatry, right, it wasn't just simply because they were stupid and worshiping statues. It's because it was literally the worship of demons. Dun, dun, dun. Have to cough. Right? It was literally the worship of demons. You can still see that today in many of the different occult rituals. Right? I actually researched this a few years ago when I was in seminary. Right? They bear a lot of similarities to what was happening in these Old Testament rituals. And sure enough, many of those rituals actually involved sexual rituals, right? Like cultic prostitution. Make no mistake about it. A lot of these things are connected. And even in our modern age, I would argue that a lot of the modern depravity we experience today in a similar way is related. I think there is a very diabolic aspect to abortion centers, right, and other things. I think in the 20th century, a lot of the things that we witnessed, a lot of the terrible ideologies, a lot of the literal Holocaust, right? I really think those were influenced by demons. Even just by sinning, right, we can open a door for the devil to enter into our life. I told the story many times. I don't know if I've shared with you guys, but a priest friend of mine, right, he knew about this exorcist in his diocese who had gone to bless a home because the family was experiencing a lot of different haunting kind of things, right? And so he went and blessed their home, and when he was done, right, he told them to call him back if they continued to experience things. And 2 weeks later, they called him and they said, it's a lot better, but we're still experiencing some things. And so he began to ask some questions. And what he found out is that in their basement, their daughter was living with her boyfriend, right? Presumably being sexually active. So he commanded the family, he has to move out. She has to go to confession, and they need to start abstaining, right? And sure enough, after that happened, they no longer experienced any of those evils in the household. Right? There's lots of different ways that we can give ourselves over to demons and let the devil enter into our heart and into our life, right? And yet God is always calling us to do the opposite, completely giving ourselves to Him. This is partly why the marriage imagery is used so much in the Scriptures. It's not because our relationship with God, right, is a foreshadowing or an image of marriage, but rather God established marriage itself as a foreshadowing of what He was calling us to in eternity. Something that is so much deeper and more united than even the greatest of marriages here on this earth. Right? That is what God is calling us to, that kind of union with Him. And even when we come to Mass, right? Even when we come to Mass, that's kind of like a foreshadowing. It's another one of the reasons why priests are supposed to be celibate. They're supposed to be witnesses to our eventual relationship with God, right? That in heaven, there will be no marriage because we will all be perfectly united with God. Also, some of you might have wondered, there's a lot of different symbolism to this, but some of you might have wondered, here at St. Bernard, there's been a few ladies who have started to wear veils, right? And even some of the younger girls have been wearing veils, right? There's a lot of different symbolism to that, but one of the symbolisms to that is to remind people of the heavenly marriage feast, right? They're foreshadowing that in the presence of God. That's also why girls, when they get their first communion, why a lot of them wear dresses, right? It's supposed to symbolize a wedding. It's why religious sisters, why they always wear their veils, right? To symbolize that they are wedded to God. In Catholic churches, you used to have over the altar, you used to have baldacchinos, right? It was kind of like that, like those things that you would see over beds, right? There's the same imagery. That at Mass, it is like the wedding feast of God and His people. When people come forward for communion, right? When they say, Amen, I believe, right? It's like a way of renewing our vows to God, that He is giving Himself totally to us, and in communion, we are giving ourselves entirely back to Him. Right? This is a constant theme of our faith. And unfortunately, in many areas of the church today, right, this is being forgotten. It's overlooked. It's one of the reasons, again, why I love tradition and why I think when traditions are established, we shouldn't just erase them because they all have significance. They're supposed to teach us about things about the faith. But too often in our church today, we just erase those traditions and we don't even realize what they meant in the first place. Right? So there's all these different things you can see in the prophet Jeremiah, and we'll continue to see as we keep reading through this book.